want to say, first of all, welcome. I see Rabbi Ari here is joining us. And we are, for myself, I actually just came back yesterday from a trip. And on the trip, we were discussing some of what's going to be discussed today. But quite frankly, all of that went out the window when just about less than an hour ago, I had a very devastating call from a local young person who was sharing very, very terrible personal news, and it just brought me down. So if I get a little bit emotional here, you'll understand, and you'll bear with me. But it did give me an opportunity. I just want to talk about this because there was a Mishnah that I was not going to be addressing today, which I decided to bring it into the conversation. And that is what, so again, I'll just back up for a second. Why is that important? Because I pick up the phone and this person actually turns out that he's not even Jewish, but a very close friend who I've known for years. And this is, I know him as a teenager, and now he's calling about the problem with his own son. Anyway, but the issue is that after a few minutes of the conversation, I had all of these responses, all of these great things that I was going to tell him to encourage and to, etc. But as I started speaking, I said to myself, shut up. No, I didn't say it to him. I said it to myself. Why did I say it to myself? Why is that suddenly, the right thing to do? Somebody's calling and asking you to tell him something and to give him some words of encouragement. And so it seemed like it should be something that should be shared. So that's why I thought of this Mishnah, and I said to myself, okay, enough of your great ideas, enough of your years of experience. Maybe it's time to just be quiet. So the truth is, if we look throughout the Mishnah, there's more than one Mishnah here and in other places of the Talmud that share that feeling, that sentiment, that sometimes you got to be quiet. But what type of wisdom is involved? What type of wisdom is the Torah teaching us when that is being said? So if you look at Pirkei Avot, if you're holding the Pirkei Avot in front of you, chapter 1, verse 17, chapter 1:17, Shimon his son said, all my days I grew up among the sages and did not find anything better for the body than silence. And then he says, not study, but deed is the essential thing. And the last thing he says is that whoever engages in excessive talk causes sin. So that's even going a little further. So again, back to the practical, I'm sort of going back to the practical application, which just happened to me less than an hour ago. But drawing back to the Mishnah, what exactly is the Mishnah telling us? So there are many ways of looking at this. First of all, you read about Shimon saying that all my days I grew up among the sages and didn't find anything better for the body than silence. So first of all, when you read this, do you see this perhaps as being a little bit gaudy or showing off or trying to show his greatness, that he merited, not like the rest of us who grew up amongst average people, he grew up amongst the sages? Obviously, that's not what the Mishnah is telling us here. What the Mishnah is telling us here is that, yes, I grew up amongst the sages, and I'm still growing up, is what he's saying. But Shimon is saying that the more you learn, the more you know. In other words, those of us who are dumb, who never learned, who are unskilled, who are unlearned, who are not very wise, and we're quiet, we're not really teaching anything by being quiet. When we have grown up amongst the great and we learn so much and we know so much and we're quiet, this silence is very different. This silence is a silence that's saying something. Now, in the case where which I just mentioned, which is a a happening case right now when there's nothing in certain situations that you can say. And therefore, by not saying, you're saying everything that's to be said. Things will be figured out. So when Shimon is teaching us here these things, and the fact that it's connected, by the way, is also important. The fact that he says that he doesn't just say that the best thing is to be quiet. He just says that there's nothing better for the body than silence. Again, so what does it mean? He's also telling us that it's not for the body, it's also what we learn from the body. The way Hashem created the world is, or created our body, is something also teaching us in all of these fronts and all of these areas. So the fact that Hashem created us with 2 ears and only 1 mouth tells us that we should listen twice as much as we talk. That's a very simple observation of the way Hashem created us. So all you got to do is observe how things are happening. So silence versus speech, we also find in the creation. God creates the world, it says, and God said, let there be. So there were utterances where there was speech involved. Then there is also the idea of thought. Then there is the idea of action. And on these levels, this is what Shimon is addressing here, where he's number 1, he says silence. Then he says that not study is important, but the essential thing is to perform. The deed is important. So the deed is important is already going from speech to action. So in other words, we have thought, speech, and action that we are addressing here in this Mishnah. So the thought, however, is also important. Now, the problem with thought is that the thought is only something that you know what you're thinking. So you can sit, even though you might be the smartest person and the Einstein of the world, and you have all these great ideas, but you can't apply it, and it's not going to teach anyone anything because it is still stuck in your brain. It's still merely a thought. In order for someone else to be able to benefit and to understand and appreciate what you have on your mind, right? So you're sitting over there and telling your uncle or your dad, what are you thinking there? It really, you see those wheels turning and you observe that he's analyzing or whatever is going on, and he's smiling and reacting to something. What are you thinking? So you want to get that feeling, and for that, speech becomes the vehicle through which these ideas are going to become realized and appreciated. But then all the talk in the world is nothing when something has to be accomplished. So you can talk about the importance of the project, and you can, have all these political positions, but it's worthless if it's not going to lead to any action. So basically what we're saying is that God created the world with a thought, meaning that there's a purpose, that there's an idea, that there's a reason. And it's important for us to understand the reason. Because again, if you're going to go to the other extreme where you're going to act and you're going to do and you're going to perform and you're going to fulfill all the 613 commandments, but you don't know why you're doing it. You don't know why God even wants you to do it. You don't understand the thought behind everything. Eventually, it's going to become cold and dry and you're going to drop out. So on all these fronts, it's important to sort of stake and know exactly why and how far the thought has to go, why and how far the speech has to go in order to take it further, and then bring it to action, because God created the world for a purpose, and God created me for a purpose that I should help in contributing to what has to be accomplished in this world. But then it goes full circle, because when I'm doing it, I shouldn't just do it, because then if I'm just doing it and I'm a great person and I just get carried away with my action and my activity and my performance and my nice cars and my success and the accomplishments that I've done, and so then you're stuck in the action. Then it's just you and the action, and you become full of yourself. So that's why you got to go back and say, what's the thought? What's the idea? What's behind everything that has happened? So basically, just to break it down, you have what we would call the different types of speech, and that's why he's addressing it in the way he's addressing it. You have the desirable speech, you have the forbidden speech, you have the undesirable speech, and then you have the unnecessary speech. So on the first one, you say the desirable. What's wrong with the desirable? Because even the desirable, which would be, for example, studying Torah, which is desirable and it's required, and we say the bracha for it before we study Torah. If we're only going to study and we're not going to act, then again, you've almost wasted a desirable speech. A forbidden speech for sure shouldn't be spoken. An undesirable could be just inappropriate stuff. And then the unnecessary very often can go either direction, because when you're talking unnecessarily about something and somebody, or you're saying, oh, well, so-and-so might even be a great person, and you know that some of his non-admirers are sitting around the table, you know that this is going to lead to some gossip. Now, you didn't say anything wrong, but you sort of opened it. You said something that wasn't necessary. So you always have to measure where you want to be. Anyway, so this is really a very short insight in a very involving Mishnah that seems to be about silence. But the silence, it really has to be a very big part of our life. So, so again, I'm obviously not going to share the name just for confidential purposes, but I would ask you all to share in praying for the well-being of all those who need to be thought of and prayed for in our community. And more importantly, we should be more responsible and caring about the thought, again, the words that should be said, and sometimes we're afraid to say, so you should have the courage to stand up and say it. And on the other hand, things that's not necessary and might affect someone or might offend someone also should be accounted for. And that's why when the Talmud tells us that when you speak lashon hara, when you speak gossip, negative stories, even though it's true about someone, you're affecting three people are being affected: the speaker, the listener, and the one that's being spoken about. So the obvious question is, the speaker and the listener, the listener could have said, okay, don't tell me, I don't want to hear. So he's responsible for listening. But the person that's in the other room, who's not involved in this conversation, why should he be in any way negatively affected? And the obvious answer is because when the third person, the third party, did something, but it wasn't yet brought into the world in the form of speech, in a way, it didn't happen yet, right? It's almost if it's, if you didn't see it, it didn't happen, or if there's no selfie, it didn't happen. If it's not on Facebook today, there are all different types of levels which confirm something that happened. Otherwise, it didn't happen. We all have our dark little secrets. So our dark little secrets that we're able to keep private doesn't affect us as much as when someone goes out there and actually speaks about it to someone else. That brings it in to a whole new level of existence that did not exist before it was spoken. So therefore, yes, you sitting in the other room, not involved in the conversation, is being affected by the fact that in the other room, there are two people that are talking about you. So hopefully you don't fall into that trap. Anyway, so I'm going to take a little, I think I went a little over time for right now. I'll take a little break and give Rabbi Ari a chance, and then we'll come back.
Well, Rabbi Katzman, I was enjoying just listening, like you were saying in the beginning. So I was just enjoying listening. And you can keep going. No, okay. I guess I think this topic is called favorite Pirkei Avot teachings, correct? Is that right? Just I heard Rabbi Katzman's background a little bit. I want to add to that background, if that's okay, or echo it. Pirkei Avos. Somebody asked what the background is of that Pirkei Avos, ethics of our fathers. So first of all, a few words to analyze. Ethics of our fathers. Obviously, we're talking historically that we're talking about people who taught us things, and that's great. But as a play on words, also Avos also essentially means the foundation, right? So it's not just about what people taught us and how historically the wisdom of yesterday, but it's really the foundation of what we are. In other words, it's the Aleph Bet, because Av or Avos, right, is Aleph Bet. It's two letters of Aleph Bet, which is really, I can't move on to Gimel and Dalid, to C and D. I can't move on to the letters of the law. I can't move on to real Judaism without really addressing the foundation, or without addressing the Av, the parent, the father, the mother, i.e., the foundation of our existence. And what is the foundation of our existence? Which is the second word, which is essentially, or the second statement, which is derech eretz kadma l'Torah. Now, what do those words mean? Any ideas? Anybody want to jump in? Be courageous? No? Okay, so then I'll be courageous. So derech eretz kadma l'Torah, it essentially means that before I work on being devout and becoming a wise person spiritually, intellectually, I have to work on the way of the land, meaning I have to work on my character traits. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that I do this at 5 in the morning and then 6 in the morning I learn Torah. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a sequence of events. It just means that the foundation, if I'm skipping being a good person, we'll call in Yiddish being a mensch, although that's a very loose word, but it really means that I have to work on my foundation. I have to work on my character traits. The idea of character traits in Hebrew is midos. So what's the midah? A midah is a character trait, but it also in Hebrew means a measurement. So the measurement of man, the measurement of a person who is a growing good person in this world, is based on their character traits. Also, the way that, excuse me if I'm getting Kabbalistic, but I'm really getting Kabbalistic for Mark because he's a Kabbalist. But for everybody else, just to take it for 1 minute, indulge me. The idea of character traits in this world is that God is infinite. And if God's infinite, how do I have a relationship with infinite, being that I'm not infinite? So the way that I have a relationship with infinite is that I'm able to squish the infinite, or take the infinite and fit it into the finite, meaning I have specific measurements which represent my character traits that if I refine them, I'm able to actually reveal the infinite from within myself, from within my actions, my thoughts, and my feelings. So midos is very profound, and I have to work on myself daily. And if I'm not working on myself, I'm going in the opposite direction. We don't exist. Either we grow in the positive direction. If we're not, we're going to inching towards the grave, which essentially means that we're not growing. And the way that I grow is that I constantly work on myself to have better character traits and to have better midos. And there's no greater book in the world than Ethics of Our Fathers that addresses this in such a profound way. That was my introduction. Any questions on the introduction? Does that mean nobody understood it, or if it was obvious to everybody? Either one's fine. Either way, my favorite teachings, it's not going to be just one teaching, but I always am drawn towards understanding in a deeper way whenever the Mishnayos talk about humility, whenever the idea of a humble person is being addressed. It's because I'm very humble. I'm kidding, but it's because that I'm struggling with my own humility and my own finding a nice balance between being a person who values what I am versus being a humble person, and something that's always been a struggle of mine. And maybe one day I'll find that nice balance, but I always love the teachings and try to internalize what's being taught. Specifically, with the 12th, I don't have the Pirkei Avos in front of me. I think it's the the first parak, the first chapter, I think it's Aramaic, in which to the 12th or the 13th Mishnah, where it talks about a person who pursues a honor, pursues a good name, ends up destroying the good name. So a person who's pursuing honor always ends up being, the person that people roll their eyes at, because if a person is pursuing honor, it's just going to run away from them, and essentially it's going to really destroy that honor that they're really seeking out. Thank you very much, Karen. So this is something that I think is profound. I think it's profound for us to dwell upon being self-aware and knowing, and knowing im ein ani limi, which is another teaching, that I have to be my biggest fan, and I have to be my biggest supporter, and I have to make sure that I actualize myself, because otherwise God wouldn't have created me. But on the other hand, I'm a part of something much larger. So therefore, I have to express myself, which is very much the theme of this week's Parsha. I'm going to get off the topic, but it's really on topic. I hope that's okay. If not, you could have your money back afterwards. But the topic of, we're ending the book, and we say Chazak, Chazak, Benit Chazek. We end the book of Bereshis. The commentaries point out that Bereshis, and Nitziv from Volozhin explains that he calls the book of Bereshis Sefer HaYashar. This is the book, the Bereshis, the founding fathers and mothers, the Abrahams, the Avrams, the Yitzchak, the Yaakovs, the Sarah, the Leah, the Rachel, and the Leah, all the founding fathers and mothers of our nation, the building blocks of our nation, teach us how to live in a way that has the shortest distance between myself and the goal, which is essentially called the Sefer HaYashar. So it's about, and we learn from the ways of our patriarchs and our matriarchs how to live a life. And a lot of it is complicated, and a lot of it needs a lot of study, and it needs a lot of humility in order for me to understand. I will say this again, this is my weekly, or whatever I come onto this, my statement. What it means to be humble is for me to understand that everything that came before me built me, and I am just a small ant on the shoulders of giants that came before me, and hence that's what we call Orthodox Judaism, and I believe that everybody should become Orthodox. That being said, that was my disclaimer. I said this every time. Usually people smile, sometimes they don't, but I obviously don't mean that. I don't believe in movements. I don't believe in segregation. I don't believe in any type of denomination. I believe in humility. And humility means that I am great because of everything that came before me. And I'm standing on the greatness of everything that came before me. That was off topic. Back to the topic. And so this week's Parsha, we know that very famously, Yaakov and his complete bed, meaning his complete family, in which everybody has struggled, but still is part of the family, is giving blessings to all his children. But the blessings that he gives to all his children don't seem like such positive words. A lot of them is very harsh and critical. And the idea being is that everyone has a unique role and responsibility in this world. If I don't express who I am, if I don't express my uniqueness that somebody else doesn't have, then I am failing and I'm creating a vast hole. So therefore, I have to express who I am. I have to be who I am. On the flip side, I also have to understand that I'm a part of something greater and I have to contribute to the greater good. So that's idea number 1, or whatever. That was idea number 5. Idea number 6 is that ultimately, when it comes back to humility, we know that the Jewish people in Hebrew, how do you say Jew? I think people are mouthing. A Yid, good. Yehudi, a Yehudi. And why are we called Yehudim? Because of a bracha, or a direction that Yaakov gives to Yehuda in this week's Parsha, in which he says, "Oh, Yehudi, or Yehuda, all your brothers will be called your name." Now, why is that? Because Yehuda, the root word of Yehuda is hoda'ah, or to be moda, or to agree, or to admit. And essentially, Yehuda, the personality of Judah, the personality of Yehuda, is one that admits mistakes, one that's able to come up from failure to be successful, one who's able to say that I was not perfect. We know that Yehuda 2 weeks ago, Parsha sells out his brother for money, Mabetza, and essentially in last week's Parsha, Yehuda steps in a way to say, my brother Binyamin, I am going to be in his stead. I'm going to take his role and take his spot in jail in order to save him. And we see all of a sudden a big turnaround in Yehuda. We see the same thing when it came to this very interesting and disturbing story of him and his daughter-in-law, which again, he says, Tzatka mimeni, which essentially means that she was right, I was wrong. And there's a lot more to that statement, but we see Yehuda having the ability to admit fault or admit that he was wrong, and to be able to come and own it, take responsibility and change. So idea number 1, or 6a, is that what it means to be a Jew is the ability to be humble, to not to care what everybody thinks of you, but to always do the right thing. And sometimes when I make a mistake, to be able to be a big enough person to take the responsibility for the mistake. Step 1. Step 2, why is Yehuda called Yehuda? Why is Jew called a Jew? So it says famously that Leah, his mother, said, I'm very thankful to the Creator. I have a lot of hodah to the Creator because I was only supposed to have 3 children, and here I have a 4th child. A very famous Rashi. Now, what does that mean? 3 I deserved. The 4th I didn't deserve. And therefore, I was able to give hodah. And essentially, when we think something is coming to us, i.e. a lack of humility, it's very difficult for me to be grateful. To be grateful means that I'm humble. And to be humble means that not everything is coming to me. I'm not the center of my universe. I'm at the center of the universe. And I'm a humble person. I'm a part of something much larger. And essentially, whenever the Pirkei Avos talks about humility, I listen in a much deeper way. And I try to understand it more because it's a lifelong process for me to work on myself to become more humble. And hopefully one day I'll come closer to my goal. That's my spiel. I don't know if I answered the question about my favorite, but it was a group of favorites, which was essentially humility. Are we supposed to have a discussion? Or are we supposed? Rabbi Katzman, can you be silent?
Okay. Okay. Well, people are thinking, please, okay. Yeah. Okay, so while you're thinking of your questions, I'm just going to go back to the first Mishnah, which is also one of the favorites, which is actually an introduction and a general attitude that we must have towards the entire Pirkei Avot, and for that matter, life and studying Torah in general. So the very first Mishnah begins with saying, Moshe kibel Torah misinai, and I saw that request earlier to have it displayed on this screen. Mark, do you have the Pirkei Avot on the screen?
I do not.
Hold on, I can do it real quick.
Okay, if somebody can bring it up, I would appreciate it. So I'm going to the very first chapter, the very first Mishnah. The very first, thank you very much. Okay, so Moshe received the Torah at Sinai, and he transmitted it to Yeshua, and Yeshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and so on. Okay, so the very first line, let's go back. Moshe kibel Torah from Sinai. Moshe receives the Torah from Sinai. Now, who is Sinai? Is that HarperCollins? Anybody? Who is Sinai as being the author, the source of where Moshe receives the Torah?
It was where God told us the 10 Commandments.
It's
Sinai.
where God told us the very 10 Commandments. Very good. But did Sinai write the Torah?
No.
It didn't. But yet, we're told that the Torah was received by Moshe from Sinai. And now later, when you talk about the next step, it says in Masora Yeshua, and it was transmitted to Yeshua. Rather than saying, following the same pattern, just like Moshe Kibel, Moshe received it from Sinai, likewise Yeshua received it from Moshe. But the Mishnah is switching gears, so to speak. So There's obviously many commentators that talk about that, but I just want to address one aspect there, and that one aspect, which is what makes it favorite, just to stick with the name of this discussion, is that first of all, why do we have to say Moshe? If at the end of the day, I mean, shouldn't God be mentioned here somewhere? Does he have something to do? Yeah. Well, what's God have to do with this? You might say, right?
God transmitted the Torah at Sinai to Moshe.
So why is the Mishnah not even mentioning God here?
Maybe because he's hidden. I don't know.
So, I guess everybody's really being shy today. This is unconventional. I guess, but if Rabbi Ari couldn't get anyone to speak, so I won't get in either. But if you want to jump in, please go ahead and do so, and you can even interrupt in the middle of mid-sentence. Anyway, so just coming back to this question and trying to address it a little bit, is that Moshe is, again, it doesn't even say Rabbi Moshe. It doesn't say Moshe Rabbeinu. It says Moshe. The essence of Moshe, whenever we say Moshe without any titles, is because we're really trying to get into the kishkis, to the essence of who this personality is. So the personality of Moshe is one which we learn at the very end of the Torah, which says Moshe Anov Mikol Adam Apnei Adama, meaning that he was the most humble person on the face of the earth, but he was most humble from the Adam, the simplest person. But so you ask yourself, how could Moshe, who knows that he is the only person who Hashem is having that relationship with, and he's the person that's teaching everyone how can be humble in front of the simple guy or woman who doesn't have any knowledge whatsoever or has no interest in Torah? So the obvious answer to that we have later on in the Mishnah as well, that you shouldn't be done. You shouldn't judge. You shouldn't be judgmental, and you should always judge a person in the positive. How can you judge someone who's bad in a positive way? So therefore, the Torah tells you that you should judge him, meaning that your judgment is going to help tilt help affect his decision on what his next move is going to be. So if you find a way of saying, well, there's a story of Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev, who is known to be the greatest protector, the greatest defender of the Jewish people. So he's walking in the street, it happens to be on Yom Kippur, and he sees a Jewish fellow in the shtetl over there sitting and smoking a cigarette in the middle of Yom Kippur, and he approaches him and he says, sir, you probably don't realize that it's Yom Kippur today. So he says, of course I know it's Yom Kippur. And he takes another puff with that cigarette. And he says, well, perhaps you don't realize that it's forbidden to smoke on Yom Kippur. So he says, I know, and he rattles off the whole script in the Code of Jewish Law that says clearly that it's forbidden. He knew. He was a learned man. And after several comments like that, trying to convince him to throw away that cigarette, and unsuccessfully, he turns to his head to the heavens and he says, Hashem, look how wonderful your people are. Even those who don't observe Yom Kippur, however, they won't lie on Yom Kippur. They won't tell a lie. So he figured out how to justify something. And that's interesting, as also coming back to what we talked earlier about the speech and the deed. Hashem creates the world every day, recreates the world every day with speech. On Shabbos, he recreates the world with thought. So therefore, there's no action, there's no activity going on, because even speech is not going on. Therefore, we're more elevated on Shabbos. Therefore, we're told that even according to halacha, someone who's ordinarily not believed concerning Truma and so on, from Sunday to Friday, on Shabbos, however, we believe him. Because even Amoritz, someone who ordinarily not believed according to Jewish law, on Shabbos, because of the sanctity, because of the holiness, because of the uniqueness of the day, even a simple person doesn't lie. Anyway, so coming back to this idea of Moshe Kibbel Torah Misinai. So Moshe is humble and therefore respectful, respects every single Jew, and therefore he's the only one that can teach and pass over this incredible Torah to every Jew. Because someone who feels aloof and elevated from the rest of the people will not be a good teacher and will not be able to convey whatever the greatness of the Torah has to offer. Now, when we say Sinai, why is it important to even say where the location was? And why did Hashem choose it? Why couldn't he wait to come, as they arrive in Israel and they have the big stadium in the middle of Jerusalem, and that's where the Torah should be given great honor. Instead, Hashem chooses in the middle of the desert while they're still traveling, they're still tired, they're focusing, concentration is definitely not in the classroom, and that's where Hashem is doing it because of two reasons. Sinai represents a mountain, but what type of mountain? It was a mountain that was the lowest amongst the mountains. On the other hand, Hashem could have given it on the ground level, but he chose not to give it on ground level, because for a Jew to receive the Torah and to follow the Torah, he has to have a certain degree of pride. Pride, which means that he won't be a pushover. And if a person is going to criticize, why are you doing this mitzvah from the Torah? Why are you even sitting and studying Torah? He has to have that level of pride, feeling that he was part of the chosen people and he was given the Torah of Hashem. And the Torah is very important, more important than the Omaha World Herald. So therefore, he's learning the Torah with great pride. And that's indicative of this mountain concept. But on the other hand, when all it says, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but you probably never talked to a mountain yourself, but the Torah tells us that every created being has a soul. Every created being has an angel that makes it survive, that makes it work, that makes it grow, and so on. So therefore, the mountains also have their spiritual counterpart, which represent them. So the spiritual counterpart of all the mountains in the Sinai desert were vying for the attention and offering their service that Hashem should give the Torah upon them. I'm the tallest mountain, I'm the prettiest mountain, and so on. And Sinai was the only mountain that didn't offer itself because it didn't have anything special to brag about. And Hashem says, we will choose this little mountain, this short mountain that has on the one hand the aspect of mountainous, but on the other hand, it is humble, to teach all of the students of the Torah for all time to be the number one, the personhood of teaching who we receive the Torah from has to be somebody like Moshe who is humble. The place, the situation that we find ourselves has to have the characteristics of a Sinai. And once we have those things, then it can go over. And therefore also, Masarah Yeshua, when it says that he gave it over to Yeshua, transmitted it to Yeshua, he doesn't say that Yeshua received it from Moshe, but at this point, because Moshe already has it in him, and like many teachers or professors, we have this pride that this is our idea, and we're holding on to the intellectual properties, and it's mine and mine, and I copyright my teachings, and I'm publishing, and so on. Moshe, he gave everything away. Everything he had, he gave away to Yeshua. He didn't have any pride, any ownership, any claim to any aspect, even though it was just given to him. And he could have just given Yeshua some of it. He gave everything away, and he didn't claim anything for himself. And because he didn't claim anything for himself, the Mishnah finds it important to give it because he didn't want it, because Moshe didn't want it. And therefore, this teaching that we learn, we also have the Moshe aspect of it, where we take it the way Moshe took it, but giving every way and not being stingy in our time, not being stingy in our attention, to just teach it to every single person that's out there willing to listen to us and share the great wonders and insights of our wonderful Torah. And that goes on to this Mishnah and the entire tractate of Pirkei Avot. Anyway, I just thought this was another one of the favorites. And again, we'll take another break. Hopefully there's some comments, questions, ideas, or just a song you might want to sing.
All right, I'll break the uncomfortable silence. Let's try to, I want to get back on gallery view. Hang on a second. Okay.
Andy's quiet today. That's funny.
I'm overwhelmed with the statements that all are accurate and are right on. So it's hard to comment on something that's right on.
Okay.
All right, so let's try to be more controversial then. Well, I want to piggyback a little bit on speech and silence, and maybe lead into judgmental. So, there's two Mishnayos that talk about not being judgmental. You should always judge somebody favorably. I shouldn't say not judgmental. You should always judge somebody favorably, and then don't judge somebody until you know where they came from or where they were standing. That's more accurate. And I think one really answers the other. How do you always judge somebody favorably? What does it even mean? How could you just be naive and always judge someone favorably? And I think the answer is depends why you're judging them. Meaning, well, what's the tachlis? What is the reason why you're judging them? And 9 out of 10 times, you're judging them because you don't want them to affect you, perhaps, or because you want to talk about them. So let me explain that. So I think that the second reason, the second mission that is teaching us this, again, I don't remember what it was, I apologize, but the second mission that's teaching us not to judge somebody because until you stood in their shoes or their ground that they walked on, I think, I think that's very understood. I think we can never judge a person's whole neshama, person's whole soul, whole character, because we have no idea what their background was. And I think that gives us the insight of always judging somebody favorably, which essentially means it should be off center a little bit towards love. I spoke about this last week about Rabbi Cook explains how through when we look at my own family, right? So this is again off of last week's Torah portion about the favoritism that seemingly Yaakov gave to Yosef. And that caused the jealousy of the brothers, and etc. So there is a statement that it's the extra coat that Yaakov gave to Yosef, this showing a little bit of favoritism that causes all the animosity that the brothers have for him. And Rabbi Cook explained something really beautiful, I think very practical for us, for sure those who have families, that when it comes to our families, we can never ever show favoritism to any one of our children. And that causes a lot of pain to other children. Obviously, I think that's pretty obvious. And the question is, how do I do that? Meaning, what do you mean? One of my children is better behaved, does better at school, is more successful, makes me more proud as a parent. And the answer is those are not reasons for love. Love is emotional. And love is that you love your children for no reason, right? So this is something that I spoke about in the past, how I love my wife. And if I start telling you all the reasons why I love my wife, I might be outside of love. So love is really an emotion, which again is directed by our brains, but for the most part, it's an emotion. And Rabbi Cook explains when it comes to my own family, emotions come first. In other words, when I come to the world, when I look at the world and I analyze the world and the positive and the negative, it starts with my brain. That's what it means to be a thinking person. And we have to be B'nai Melachim, which essentially means we have to be a kingdom, and we have to be kings or queens. And the way that we're kings and queens, mentioned in the past, is Moach Lev Kaved, which essentially means that my intellect directs my heart, which directs my desires. That's how I'm supposed to live my life in general. That's how I approach one is supposed to approach everything in this world. Is something good for me? Is going to lead me in a path of growth? And then that's supposed to direct my emotion, which is supposed to direct my desires. All very important in human development, spiritual development, all very important, but the priority has to be given to the intellect directing the emotion, directing the desires. When it comes to my family, when it comes to my own family members, it's not supposed to be that way. And emotion is supposed to be first, meaning that the love that I have for my family is not dictated by intellectual terms, meaning it's not based on anything that's it's not based on anything. It's not tluya b'davar. It's not dependent on anything, but it's really something that's absolute love. It takes a lot of work, but that's absolute love. And really, this is how we're supposed to look at the concept of Avot Yisrael. The point of loving your fellow man is the same idea, that it's very much has to be, I'm judging somebody favorably. The way that I can judge someone favorably is you don't know, like, what's causing this person to have all this bad behavior, to have this bad way, you think a bad way of looking at it, or his bad character traits, or etc. Well, you have no idea where the person came from, and maybe the person moved up the ladder much more than I moved up the ladder, because I started off in a higher place because of my beautiful parents and my beautiful upbringing, and etc. You have no idea where a person came from, and therefore it's that's very key. I didn't really want to talk about that, but that was two mishnayos about being judgmental. What I want to talk about was something very practical that I've worked on, and again, this really piggybacks off of what Rabbi Katzman said about speech. And I think one of the beautiful things about learning Torah, about Pirkei Avos, as opposed to watching the news, as opposed to spending this hour learning Torah, as opposed to watching the news, whatever flavor you like of the news, is that when you watch the news, it's 90% about people and 10% about ideas. Whereas in the Torah, it's never about people. You're not talking about people. You're talking about ideas, and you're talking about concepts. And people who grow don't talk about people. People who grow and people who want to change don't discuss people. They discuss ideas. They discuss teachings. Now, it happens to be a lot of the teachings are attributed, or all the teachings are attributed to very special people. And there is a definitely connection with the people who taught those teachings. But there's something to say, that something very practical, which is something that I work on, and I will share it with you, not from a lack of humility, but I think something that's important. At my Shabbos table, which is a holy Shabbos table, and I want it to be a holy Shabbos table, I don't remember ever discussing anybody that was not at that table, ever. It's not a time. And if someone would ever bring up a name, be like, okay, call me on Tuesday. There's now is the time. We talk about ideas. We talk about each other, meaning everybody that's present. Never talk about others. And this is something that it's a hard thing to do. It's so easy today to always talk about other. It's the world of social media. It's the world of the internet. I just constantly am listening about other people and what they're doing, what they're not doing, and etc. But that's not what makes us grow the most. What makes us grow the most is talking ideas and talking our feelings and talking our approach to things and learning from someone else's approach and ideas, but never to talk about the people. And I think this is where Rabbi Katzman was talking about Lashon Hara. Obviously, it's one of the hardest. It's one of the hardest, but I think that the holier we are and the holier we can become, we set up these parameters and say, I'm not interested. I don't need to hear what this person did, what this person said, even if this person happens to be a public figure. It doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't make me a better person by listening to it, or by even analyzing it, or agreeing with it or not agreeing with it. And I think that's something that's important for us to work towards. And I think this is really a lot of the teachings of Pirkei Avos. Like, we have limited time. Let's not waste our time. And and growing up in Brooklyn, New York, WINS. Anybody know? I'm familiar with that. Or by Katzman, WINS.
Wins news. You give us 21 minutes, we'll give you the world.
It was 22 minutes. But that was it. You got everything in 22 minutes. Now you can live life. That changed. And like, it's something to be very, very conscious of. It's not, it's something, it's not 22 minutes anymore. And even that 22 minutes, probably 15 of that wasn't necessary. But like, I think that's an important thing for us to focus on. We have to constantly grow, and we have to constantly change. And we can't be the same we were yesterday. And I think that's very much a theme in Pirkei Avos.
Rabbi Steve Reiches. I don't disagree with anything you said or Rabbi Katzman said this evening, but I just want to throw out for discussion. Many years ago, a high school teacher wrote an essay about an experiment. He asked his class, was Hitler a bad man? And the majority of his students said, well, we can't judge. We can't be judgmental. And he was absolutely shocked by that response. I throw that out just for discussion.
Very, very good discussion. I think we have to end now in like 5 minutes, so it's going to take longer than that. I think there's always outliers. I think there's always extremes. But obviously, that was very disturbing to hear. I've heard that before. But obviously, we are supposed to react in a way for the next 1,000 years about Hitler without any type of analysis that would make us understand. Let me bring this point home a little bit. I was with my grandfather, who himself is a Holocaust survivor, in Auschwitz. And there's a tour guide. And the tour guide started innocently, nice guy, started psychoanalyzing Hitler, right? Problem is, I could hear it, right? My grandfather, who's a Holocaust survivor, cannot hear it. So I'm with my grandfather in Auschwitz. He literally walked away, and we didn't see him for 6 hours. Now, his whole family was killed near Auschwitz. So for someone to analyze to my grandfather about the idiosyncrasies or the psychological background of Hitler is just, it's irrelevant. It's inappropriate. Come 1,000 years from now, I'm saying 1,000 years, when we're not so emotionally connected to a Holocaust, that's just going to be the reality, just like we're not so emotionally connected to the Jewish people leaving Egypt, and I'm not comparing the two. There is going to be room for some intellectual discussion, just not now. Just not now for the next 500 years. I just went down from 1,000 to 500 years. But obviously, when someone says a statement of today to someone to make an insensitive statement that we don't judge Hitler, I think is unaware, is insensitive, it's too fresh, it's too raw, and it's very ignorant. That's my answer.
Thank you. I just want to jump in for a second and comment that I would say even after 5,000 years, it wouldn't be appropriate. And that is why we still sound the grogger when we mention Haman after several thousand years that happened. Because even when we say Hevetanat Kal Ha'adam, you should judge every person, you only judge a person, but these are not people. These can't be classified as people. They're monsters, and they're the epitome of evil, and there's absolutely no redemption for them whatsoever. And that's what's interesting is, in the Mishnah, all our favorite Mishnahs, which they all are mentioned with authors, not just for copyright reasons, but the reason why we're mentioning the authors in all of these Mishnahs is because when we understand their personal background and their history, we can put it in better context. So what's interesting is that Yeshua ben Parachia, according to many, was the teacher of Oiseh Ha'ish, which is the way that person is the term that's used when we refer to Jesus in the Talmud. And so his name was Yeshu, and his teacher Yeshua ben Parachia rejected him because of something that he did, which was not appropriate. And then later, when he tried to bring him back, he said, no, I'm not interested anymore. And he went off and created this whole monster, which we know as Christianity, which caused many problems, especially back in the early years. So therefore, Yeshua ben Parachia has the authority, and therefore it was driven to say that even somebody who he initially rejected and therefore went off to create this new religion, even such a person, if he would have been a little bit more patient with him, perhaps he could have prevented something like that from happening. But we're all talking about people within the realm of humanity. A person like Hitler, a person like Haman, they don't even fit in, and they don't even deserve the room of being called a human being.
So Rabbi, since you said I haven't chatted anything and I'm about to do it, so with that being said, I think I heard two things. one, always look at somebody from a positive point of view, and two, don't be judgmental until you are in their shoes. If I heard both of those correctly, they seem to be in conflict, because the moment you find something good about somebody, you're already being judgmental. So how do we balance both of those out, where we're not supposed to be judgmental, but we're supposed to find good in everybody, which in fact is judgmental?
I don't know if it says don't be judgmental. I'm sorry.
Until you stand in someone's shoes, right?
What's that?
Until you stand in someone's shoes.
Don't judge until they're in their shoes.
Yeah, right. But if you're not in their shoes and yet we're supposed to find something good about them, do we wait until we're in their shoes to find something good? Or do we, before we get in their shoes, do we say, hey, this is a real mensch or whatever?
Okay, Andy, so again, it's a very good point, but there are two aspects here. There is the time that you should judge, and there's the time that you shouldn't judge. So when we're talking about being judgmental objectively and making a decision or making a judgment of where this person should be, then we're saying, okay, get into his shoes, and then you'll be able to, to give an honest opinion, which you ordinarily can't. But when we're in Yeshua ben Parachia's case, when he's saying vehevidan, he says affirmatively, you should judge every person favorably. There he's talking more of the spirit of it. The spirit of it is not so much technical, but more feeling. We want to bring out the best in this person. So in the case of Yeshua ben Parachia, where he didn't bother to bring out the best in who eventually became Yeshu, which is a problem, had he tried to bring out the good from him, good within him, then perhaps he would have avoided him going sour.
Okay, so with that being said, adding on to what Mr. Reich suggested, but I'm going to use a different name. I'm going to use Bernie Madoff.
Okay.
What do we say about Bernie Madoff that we have not had a chance to be in his shoes? We don't know why he did what he did, but are we obligated to find something good about him?
I would have to discuss him at my Shabbos table.
Take a Shabbos, y'all.
No, my point is that, okay, we could discuss him. We could discuss him. He does not take up much space in my brain. I mean, there is Rachmanis. I have compassion on him. I have compassion on his family. I have compassion on the people that he messed over and stole from. I'm not so sure that I'm in a place to even go further than that. Would I loan him money? No. But I don't think that I don't know that it comes up in my daily life to even, why do I have to even address that? Why is it my place? I'm not a judge, and I wasn't affected by him. Not that I'm obviously not condoning anything, and I'm not saying that what he did was right, but it doesn't really take up any time. It doesn't do anything for me to discuss his actions or not his actions.
Yet indirectly, all of us were impacted by him, because many Jewish organizations, philanthropic organizations, lost millions of dollars.
Correct.
So indirectly or directly, either one, we were all affected.
You could even say
I would say worse than that. Hashem's name was desecrated.
Desecration of God. Correct. Yeah. Again, if it's appropriate to talk about, desecration of God is one of the worst things that one can do, and absolutely, and according to some opinions, there is no forgiveness for that. I guess my question is, why do we have to discuss it? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that, but
That's fair. That's fair.
His actions were terrible. I have no idea anything more than that.
The only reason I bring it up is because I want to take the lesson and put it into the real world.
Right. So Andy, so to that question, I would say, is it okay to apply the not being judgmental and saying, well, maybe what he did was okay because of his circumstances? So there I would say no, because the action is completely unacceptable. There's no way of justifying that type of behavior. There's no way of justifying it.
Can I leave off with a thought? And we probably have to end. I'm gonna leave off with just a point to ponder. I got on Friday, I got a phone call from someone I know who's in prison for 10 years. And I was going back and forth. Yes, take the call, not take the call. It was, and he did something really, really bad. Spoke to him, great. He told me the story about a Hasidic Rabbi in Israel who has a follower in the same prison. Was a follower, obviously did something really bad in prison. I think he stole money, maybe similar to the other person you mentioned. And he was in prison for a long time. And this person would come from Israel. This is the Rebbe. And he would travel to America 3 times a year. He lives in Israel. And the first thing he would go to is to go visit this person in jail. Now, does that mean he's condoning? Does that mean he judged? No, he just loves the person. It doesn't mean he's condoning any action, but I don't think he's also talking about him. I don't think he's also going to retrust him and give him money, but still he loves the person, and he loves the person irrespective of his actions. Now, to go so far to say a monster like Hitler, we have to do the same thing. We're not saying that. To go so far and to say perhaps Bernie Madoff, we have to do that. Maybe it could very well be. It could very well be that I have to be able to get to a place where if I wasn't personally affected by it, say, I have no idea where he came from. I know what he did was terribly wrong and he has to get punished for that, period. But I have no idea anything more than that. It sounds like I'm avoiding the issue, but I think this is a very good discussion. I think it's a very good question that you asked. There's a lot of people that are black and white, have done a lot of bad. And those people, I think it's our place to judge their actions, not to judge their character.
Are there any other questions?
This ended strong. I like that. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, that was a great trip. Well, thank you, rabbis. We appreciate your leading the discussion and sharing your thoughts. I just want to do a couple housekeeping things. For the next 2 weeks, there will be no Beit Midrash. We'll be taking a winter break. Excuse me. We come back on January 5th. The other item, once in a while, I get questions about what's the topic for tonight or whatever that might be. It's great for me to answer those. It's not a problem at all. But if you ever want to check, you can also go to the website for Jewish Federation of Omaha, jewishomaha.org. And you'll see some sliding banners there. One of the banners is for Beit Midrash. And if you click on that and kind of scroll down, you'll see the topics that are coming up. I don't think we necessarily have the presenters, because sometimes those change back and forth a little bit. So we don't try to lock anybody in firmly at that point. The other thing that you can do is with the reminder email that I send out, there's a button there that says view the schedule. And we've put together the schedule that is both by date and also by topic, because there's groupings of topics. So if you want to ever take a look at that, that's another way that you can kind of keep up to date with what's going on.